Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we connect people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm normally the host of On the Ballot, where we talk about all things politics and policy across the U.S. And of course, many of our listeners and viewers on YouTube will understand that there's a big election coming up in 2026, congressional midterm elections. What some people may not understand or be aware of is that there are a spate, a passel, whatever you want to call it, of elections at the state level, some of which are extraordinarily important, but don't really get the attention they deserve. And to help me shine a light and some of that much needed attention on some of those races, particularly for secretaries of state in the United States, is Lou Jacobson, is a senior columnist for Sabato's Crystal Ball at the University of Virginia's Center for Politics. Know it well. Lou, welcome to On the Ballot. Appreciate you having.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's great to have you talk about secretaries of state elections because, again, one of those classes of elections offices that people may know something about. They may see it on their driver's license sometimes, but they don't know about. Give us the broad overview of who these officials are and why we should pay attention to them.
Sure. So in the vast majority of states, the Secretary of State is most important or most notable for being in charge of running elections in that state. Now, not every state has a Secretary of State. So there are, I think, 3 that don't, and in some of those states, the lieutenant governor has that portfolio. In certain other states, there is a Secretary of State, but they don't happen to oversee elections. The other typical things a Secretary of State might do is like handle business licensing, sometimes handle the DMV, stuff like that, which is fairly non-controversial. But the most controversial part, and again, this is in most states, but not all states, is that Secretary of States do oversee the elections. They have some leeway typically in terms of interpreting the law, but they do have to follow the law of that state as well as applicable federal laws. And in most of the states that have a Secretary of State, they are elected by the people. In a couple, they're not. Actually, more, I guess it's kind of a handful. In a bunch of states, the governor appoints them. So you have a Secretary of State who is indirectly elected through the governor, through their choice of governor. And in some states, like Tennessee, it's the legislature, I believe, and in Maine, I think it's the legislature as well. So there are some variations, but basically, I would say that a majority of states have a directly elected Secretary of State whose most controversial and significant job duties include overseeing elections.
And we've had recent history where secretaries of state, who normally, like you said, have, I guess they're more of, they make the gears of government run. They barely did become the objects of headlines that they were unaccustomed to.
They have become much more relevant in recent years because of the controversies over voting rules. The first time that I, as a journalist, really noticed secretaries of states and started to cover them was in 2000 in the big post November election recount in Florida, where the then Florida's appointed Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, became kind of in the eye of the hurricane there in terms of some moves that she did to help George W. Bush win the state. It was controversial, and I started to really track the Secretary of State elections probably by the next election, 2002, 2004. So I've been covering them to a certain extent, and I've been directly handicapping them with a safe, likely, leans, or toss-up rating for at least, I think, the past 5 elections for various publications, for the past couple for Sabato's Crystal Ball. And I've kind of enjoyed that because no one else does it, and so I kind of have the field free to myself.
Right.
I do this for the state attorney general's races as well. Sabato's Crystal Ball has my piece, and I'm told it's going to run Wednesday of this week. Doing the same thing I did for Secretary of State races, handicapping them. I did the handicapping for the state attorney general's races. I also handicap for them the state legislatures, the control of the state legislature. I don't like handicap every single seat. That would be thousands and thousands of seats, but I do handicap control of the state legislatures, which I've done since 2002 for various publications. So these are I find it interesting because these are not necessarily closely watched types of offices, but they hold a fair amount of power and are important.
And because you've covered them for so long, you can probably recall, because I vaguely do, how there were strategies among the national parties to focus on Secretary of States in elections because they saw this was, an office where they could really affect the process, the election process. And I think some of this stemmed out of past presidential election, both irregularities and mythology. But it's really been in the last, I don't know, what is it, 20 years that at least the national parties has started to focus on these contests. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think two things going on here. One is for going back years and years, parties have been interested in winning these seats because these are often stepping stones to higher office.
Sure.
So often, the number of statewide elected officials varies state by state. Typically, it's between 3 and 8 or so per state, of which Secretary of State is often one. And so if you're an ambitious member of the legislature or county executive or something in a state, and you've your eyes set on the governorship, you may not necessarily have a good shot at winning it directly from the state legislature. But if you get a statewide elected office, such as Secretary of State, and you win that, then you start to get statewide uh, uh, name recognition, press coverage, which can then boost your chances of getting a governor's seat, maybe even a House seat, a Senate seat, etc. So these sorts of positions have always been in demand, but I would say the real boost in terms of attention came after 2016, um, with and in 2020, especially after 2020, when you had Donald Trump talking a lot about mail-in voting being bad, and like urging secretaries of state to crack down on voter fraud and things like that. It really became big in 2022, uh, in the elections of 2022, because you had a number of races, and I handicapped these, and most of the tight races going into election day, the ones that I had in toss up, um, typically were a fairly mainstream Democrat versus a Trump aligned, maybe sort of election denier type of GOP candidate. And most of these uh, of of the elections ended up the Democrats winning in 2022. Democrats, didn't have a great 2022 necessarily. They did better than expected. It wasn't a wipeout, but on secretaries of state votes, they tended to do pretty well. Um, they won all of the major swing states, secretaries of state races. And it was because I think voters, whatever they felt about other things in politics, didn't really feel like comfortable giving the sort of keys to the kingdom, the Secretary of State kingdom, to somebody who was clearly aligned with a sort of election denial, agenda.
Well,
Um,
and yeah, and you did handicap some of those in the piece, for the crystal ball.
yeah,
Yeah, and we can just talk about maybe a handful of those that you think are the most
yeah.
interesting that people might wanna follow.
Yeah, so the vast majority of the races for 2025 and 20, well, actually, it's only 2026 because the states that do vote in 2025 don't directly elect secretaries of state, Virginia and New Jersey. There are 26 states that will have um, different various elections for secretaries of state in 2026. The current breakdown is the GOP holds 26 offices, the Democrats hold 21. So the GOP does have an edge right now. Um, the vast majority of those are safe for one party or the other. Um, but there are basically five competitive races that I see, four of which are toss-ups and one of which is a lean Republican state. The four toss-up states are Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, and Wisconsin. If those states sound familiar, they are because they are
Yes.
central battleground states, not
Yes.
surprising.
Yep.
And the fifth state is also presidential battleground state, Georgia. That is a lean Republican state, as far as I can tell right now. Georgia um, is a little unsettled because it's unclear whether Brad Raffensperger, who is a Republican, but uh, one who has been quite critical of Trump. It's he still appears to be running again, but he might run for a different office. So we're not sure what that race is going to look like. That's also true in some of these other states. We don't know the final lineups. It is still a year and a half before the election, almost. So still a lot of ground to be covered in terms of people getting in the race, getting out of the race. But those are the five states that I'm paying the most attention to.
And so there's obviously a lot of time before we start talking about who's actually on the ballot in a lot of these cases.
Yep.
But is there anything below the radar that you didn't include in your piece that you think this could be an issue in these contests?
I think it's very much an open question how much voter concern about the voter concern about election results and the sanctity of election results and voter fraud and things like that. It obviously was very big in 2022, which was the last year we had this many races for secretaries of state, and the voters' choice was clear. They would rather have a Democrat compared to a Trump-aligned Secretary of State. Whether or not now that Trump's president and he's won, whether that will carry the same weight with voters is unclear.
Mm.
Now, interestingly enough, today, in the midst of the talks with Putin and with Zelensky about Ukraine, Trump has brought up again the issue of the security of elections and whether mail-in voting is secure. He's been very critical of that. Maybe this will become a big issue again, and it might not be smart for him to raise it because maybe he get along without spurring opposition um, by kind of raising that profile, that issue.
Yeah.
But it does appear to be today, literally today, more salient an issue than than I thought even when the story ran about a week or two ago.
Right, because the president said something along the lines of that he was going to lead a movement against mail-in ballots.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and he's also talking about getting rid of voting machines, voting all by paper,
Mhm.
which, you know, um, just seems like, it's, if you literally have to count through actual paper ballots by hand, it's gonna take, months to figure out the election results, which clashes with his, concern about getting the election results immediately. So, you gotta choose one or the other. But that could raise the salience, of the issues, in the Secretary of State races and, potentially help Democrats, especially in a year in which the out party from the White House, which in this case would be the Democrats, tend to do well in the midterm years as a kind of, they call it a thermostatic reaction, against the party in power. So, in the toss-up states that I've got Arizona. You've got an incumbent Democrat who hasn't really done anything wrong or controversial, I don't think. And I don't know. There is one kind of Trump-aligned candidate in the race. There could be more getting in. Wisconsin is an interesting case because it actually has nothing to do with elections. So there is a Secretary of State race, And this is also up in the air because the Democratic governor there, Tony Evers, he chose not to seek a third term. He just announced that a few weeks ago, and so the field for all the statewide elected offices are kind of changing,
Hmm.
developing. So we don't know what's going on there. I kind of default put it as a toss up because it's a very competitive state, but we don't know it. Don't know very much about the competitors there. Michigan has an open seat because the Democratic incumbent Jocelyn Benson is running for governor, which also is an open seat. Democrats have two very credible candidates. No announced GOP candidate last I looked, unless that's changed in the past day or two. Um, there, the parties actually choose who the contenders are at a convention. Um, so that's a different method. Usually it's by primary, but in Michigan it is a convention vote. So you could see, a nominee chosen, especially in the GOP in the GOP convention, you could see a more Trump aligned
Mhm.
candidate there than a sort of establishment candidate who might be more successful in the primary. And then the final of the toss up seats is state of Nevada. There's a Democratic incumbent there. Again, doesn't seem to have any obvious vulnerabilities. The GOP will certainly contest this seat. Last I checked, they don't have anybody firmly in line for that race, but I expect someone to be chosen at some point.
And before I let you go, Lou, I have to ask this. You are involved in one of, uh, I think, the most important and fascinating projects in American politics, and that is you are the driving force behind the Almanac of American Politics. Please tell us about this. Tell us
That's
about
right.
this.
So the Almanac has been nicknamed the Bible of American politics. Um, it was started around the time I was born. The first edition was the 1972 edition, which would have come out in mid 1971, I think. And Michael Barone was the founding author. He's still with us. He wrote the Donald Trump profile for the current edition, 2026 edition, which is coming out September 2nd. And I've been involved with 8 volumes. And for the first time this year, I am the chief author. Um, and it has profiles of every member of Congress, Senate, and House, every congressional district, every state, every governor, tons of data, election results, campaign finance spending. We even have profiles of the geography and the members and the politicians who represent the territories from Puerto Rico to Guam to the Northern Mariana Islands. And it ends up being about 2,000 pages, more than 2,000 pages. So it's a real thick volume. And we had about I think in the end, we had about 20 contributors writing chapters and putting together all the data which was needed. And we basically started our work within a couple of weeks after the election closed in November, and had most of written, excuse me, had most of it written by about late April. And then sent it to the printer finally, I think in very early July, and about 2 months turnaround time it should be available at our website, which let me get that so I don't say the wrong thing here. Um, it is the Almanac of American Politics.com. No spaces, no dots, just the Almanac of American Politics.com. You can order it there directly.
We will put that in the show notes too.
Sounds
But
good.
I can't stress enough how important a resource that is for those of us who follow politics. It is literally one of those things you can read for enjoyment and learn something at the same time.
Yes,
And
and actually, I can show you. I can stand up, and I've got the
awesome.
the entire run from 72. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, I can see some of 'em. Oh, look at that.
From 72 to the most recent one.
Oh, yeah, I can see I had some of those too, and you still got them. How about that? Yeah, it is a spectacular resource, and I should also mention that Ballotpedia had a hand in doing that for several years as well.
Yes. And you did a
So,
great job doing it.
And so it's something eventually we all work for it, right?
Yes. Yes. It is definitely a place where a lot of political journalists cut their teeth at some
Right.
point in their career.
And again, that's publishes when? September 2nd?
September 2nd. There might be a little bit of a delay from the printer, but it's going to be basically first week of September.
Well, we'll be on the lookout for that. Lou Jacobson, a senior columnist for Sabato's Cristobal at the University of Virginia's Center for Politics. And, one of the Hercules performers that puts out the Almanac of American Politics. Thank you for joining us on the ballot today. Really appreciate it. And for everybody else out there, thanks for joining us. And you can listen to this wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can see it all, and you can see Lou's bookshelf with all those Almanacs of American Politics on it on YouTube. So check us out there. But we'll be back soon with another episode. And until then, I'll see you on the digital pages of Ballotpedia. Take care.